When you look at all of the Gunpla grades, I would say that none have changed over the years quite as much as the SD line, from its inception back in the 1980s to the revolutionary release of the MGSD line. But how did we get here? Well, for that, we're gonna have to go back to the beginning. 1979, the Doobie Brothers, What a Fool Believes, was #1 on the charts. Christopher Reeve was Superman, and Jimmy Carter is the president. How is this man still alive? But what also was alive in '79 was Gundam, with the first episode airing on April 7th to millions of children. This is the start of what people like to call real robots. Now, real robots are where these giant mecha and military science fiction intersect. Essentially, this is when mechas, in this case Gundams, are seen no different than any other military vehicle. They are mass-produced, usually designed by the government's military, and are used to cause mass destruction, sometimes against civilians. This is in stark contrast to the super robots, which are more like superheroes that are one of a kind to the rider. These usually come from some sort of ancient civilization or alien and feature mystical powers. With the more realistic suits, though, came more realistic plots, and I don't know if you can believe this or not, but the more realistic military plots lead to a much more, let's say, depressing and violent show. This meant that younger audiences everywhere were left out of the Gundam fun, which also meant that Bandai was missing out on that audience's money. That was until a junior student from Nagoya named Koji Yokoi sent in some illustrations to Model News, which was a magazine that Bandai had been publishing in the 80s. The illustrations were of Gundams where the head took up about half of the body. The editor-in-chief took to the drawings and even got Koji to make his own 4-frame comics in the magazine. These new robots, coined Super Deformed Gundams, were so popular that they were immediately put into production to be sold, but not as model kits. Originally, they were made for capsule toys, specifically as SD Gundam-shaped erasers that could be sat atop a pencil. This coincided with the release of SD Gundam World in 1985, which proved to be a smash hit. The SD line would then diversify into mangas, trading cards, animes, video games, and yes, eventually, model kits. The more lighthearted and comical tone led to the sales of the SD Gundam franchise being far higher than the rest of the show's IPs in the late 80s and 90s. This led to the creation of their own shows, such as SD Senko Kuden, also known as Musha, which was set in 16th century Japan. There was also SD Gundam Gaiden, also known as Night Gundam, which has a more fantasy medieval setting, and the SD Command Chronicles, which has a modern military style. These shows proved to be such a hit that it inspired a new flood of super deformed robot shows in the late 80s and 90s, such as Sunrise's Mashin Hiro Wataru and How Takai Ruin Night, as well as video games such as the Super Robot Wars franchise, with their first game, Super Roboto Taisen, being released in April of '91 for the Game Boy and has since grown to be a very popular video game franchise. It wasn't just TV and video games that picked up the cutesy vibe of SD, as they also tried to break into the music industry. No longer were they dropping colonies, they were dropping music videos like Mushua Parku, which I can only describe as a mechanized cocomelon that halfway through just kind of turns into an ad for models. Which then leads me to the star of the show, the models. Now, it took a little bit of a push for Bandai to start producing models for the SD lines, but once they did, they found out it could be quite lucrative. SD Gundam BB Senshi was the first line of SD kits to be released and was based off of the mobile suits from different Gundam series. The first two to be released were the BB Senshi Gundaman and BB Senshi Zetaman 2, both released in April of '87 for 300 yen. 4 more BB kits were released that year, with the Dorakun and Zakun being released in June and the Zetaman and Dawn being released in August. These were your standard run-of-the-mill SD kits that featured few pieces, an easy build process, color separating stickers, and a spring-loaded BB gun launcher in their weapons. And yes, I'm not kidding, that is actually how these kits got their name. The first 6 kits in this line all had the ability to shoot a plastic BB through a spring-loaded contraption inside of their weapons, a feature that was quickly removed by Bandai, citing product liability and safety concerns, which, yes, obviously. While the feature was scrapped soon after, the name stuck and has since had hundreds of releases in this line, with the 300th kit, the Ryubi Gundam, being released in 2007. The series came to its end in 2018, making it the longest running line in the history of Gunpla. While the BB line was super successful in getting the SD kit line off and running, not all lines were as promising. The SD Gundam Chibi Senshi line only lasted for about 2 years, from 1992 to 1994, featuring 11 kits in total. This line features much smaller kits than your standard SD Gundams, measuring an average of 45 millimeters or just 2 inches in height. There was also the release of the SD Gundam G generation kit line spanning from June of 1999 to February of 2002. This was in coordination with the SD Gundam G generation video game, which was released for the PlayStation in 1998. Something that I thought was really cool about this line was that the box art for the SDs actually parodied that of the MG boxes. Over the next couple of years, a few different lines would be produced, such as the SD Gundam Force model series, which was based off the Superior Defender Gundam Force series. These were kits with only 12 or 14 pieces that were aimed towards a much younger audience. Then came the SD Brave Battle Warriors, which was a spin-off of the BB Senshi Sengokuden. Then in late 2015, the SD Gundam EX Standard line released their first kit with the RX-78. This was an update on SD Gundam that focused more on the original property of Gundam than the spin-off shows. These kits focused on being ultra cheap, cutting corners wherever they could, with multiple pieces being hollowed out on the back, as well as an extensive sticker sheet for color separation. The gimmick with the X Standard kits is that they feature weapons and accessories that are 1/144th scale, so they could be used with any high grade and still be scale accurate. Interestingly, this line was actually originally made to only be released outside of Japan, but the reception was so positive that they ended up re-releasing the line in Japan in the summer of 2016. This line was short-lived though, as it was shelved in 2017 to make way for a whole new line of SDs. Saying that though, it was brought back just 3 years later with the release of the new Gundam and Sazabi, and still has releases coming out today. Once the SDEX line was cancelled in 2017 though, Bandai started working on what would become the most detailed SD line yet with the 2018 release of the SD Cross Silhouettes. These featured an inner frame technology that was comparable to that of a real grade or master grade, but definitely fell short of what they were hoping with the inner frame, with it really just being longer limb parts that sat inside of your SD. The SDCS line also allows different frame options when it comes to height. You could either go with the classic, more stubby proportion of the SD or go for the taller design of the CS frame. This allows the builder more customization when it comes to their build, as well as an insight to what future SD inner frames could look like. You can clearly see that Bandai saw the SDCS line as their stepping off point to making SD Gundam more complicated and comparable to that of their other lines in the series. The next release in the SD line came with the SD World Heroes, based off the show with the same name. This line also incorporated the Sengoku Soketsuden model series. Bandai made improvements on this line by removing the traditional polycaps and instead used a universal joint runner. These new joints offered increased torso flexibility, hinged knees, and a highly segmented skirt section. These kits also offered an increased amount of effect and metallic parts. While these kits didn't have an attempt at a true inner frame like the cross silhouettes before them, it was a clear step in the right direction when it comes to posability and color separation for the future model kits of the SD line. This of course all leads up to January 2023, when Bandai released the revolutionary MGSD line, starting with the Freedom Gundam. This is the high end of SD kits that implements the technology used in master grade kits and scales it down to an SD level. From increased articulation to overwhelming detail to the most gimmicks we've ever seen in an SD Gundam before. The internal structure of the cross silhouettes have been greatly improved upon, with the multiple movable axes in the head, shoulders, torso, and legs. There are also expandable wings that can contract back into themselves, as well as deployable thrusters in the shoulders. Detail-wise, there have been multiple improvements when compared to other SD lines. The MGSD has realistic metallic gloss injections, as well as multi-layered camera eye effects and reflections. This clearly is where Bandai was looking to take the SD grade of kits, and I'm super excited to see where they go with the new release of their next MGSD, the Barbatos, which actually released earlier this month. We can see a lot of growth from the early days with the SD line, from selling pencil cap erasers based off sketches from a junior student to being a full-on build experience comparable to that of a master grade. The SD line continues to evolve. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, as it really helps out the channel. And down in the comments, let me know if you like this style of video. I really enjoyed making it. It's a fun little spin that I get to do, and I hope I get to make more. But other than that, I'll see you next time.